Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. We just came off of NFL Championship weekend, and honestly, all things considered, two pretty great games. I know that maybe one was a little less aesthetically appealing than the other, but honestly, not all that surprising considering the defenses that were at play. We are recording this on Monday afternoon. For today's show, we are going to be talking about first off, the Detroit Lions and the San Francisco 49ers game in the NFC and the comeback that took place in that one. Then we are going to be moving on to the AFC matchup between the Chiefs and the Ravens. And I have a lot of thoughts about that game. So we'll maybe spill a little bit over into the third segment there and then get into the Lamar Jackson conversation, talking about what we can expect from him as NFL fans going forward. How do we evaluate him going forward? And then finally, to finish off the show, I want to do this in the least cynical way possible, but knowing that we are going to be talking about the 49ers and the Chiefs a lot for the next 2 weeks, I do just want to sort of wrap up both the Lions and the Ravens, and truthfully, this was a very emotional championship weekend for these two teams that lost. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the conversation, which loss is worst, and how do these two teams move on from here. Before we get into everything, please remember to like and follow. And then for any of our live viewers, remember to use the link at the bottom ticker scrolling across your screen. That is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip to help get your questions the priority that they deserve. So, getting into this first matchup between the 49ers and the Lions, this was a little bit of a shocker to me coming out of the gates just based off of how these two teams looked. Now, I think that the Lions are a very talented team, and especially their offense, you can see that, but I did not see them running away with the first half like they did in this one. They actually led by 17 points at the halftime, and they took that 24-7 lead after kicking a field goal right at the end of the first half, which was honestly a little bit of a surprising decision from Dan Campbell to kick that. Not that I thought it was the wrong decision by any means, but just based off of, and these are my thoughts at the time, based off of his track record, you would think that he'd maybe be a little bit more aggressive and go for the points. At that time, I was thinking, just end the half, get the points. It's not even like the other team gets this bad field position if you don't convert because you're just going into halftime as it is. So take the points and move on. That's what they did in this circumstance. And then field goals ended up, of course, being a huge storyline going forward in this game because of none other than Madman Dan Campbell and his very aggressive fourth down strategies that he's really put on display for the entirety of his career as the head coach for the Detroit Lions. Joined in 2021 and set the record for the most fourth down attempts in the league. In, I think, of the single season record, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, too, the Lions obviously much lower expectations. They were going into a rebuild. So it's a little bit more understandable there, and Dan Campbell trying to build up the culture in that sense. But now, a few years later, they found themselves in the NFC Championship game, the first time the Lions had been there since 1991. And it's not quite equivalent situations, you could say, just based off of the stakes behind making decisions, such as going for it on fourth down. They went for it on fourth down in the second half twice while either leading or down by 3 points. The first time they did so, they had a chance to extend the lead back to a 17-point game, a 3-score game early in the second half when they were on the 49ers 28-yard line. They elect to go for it, and it is an incomplete pass, one that Josh Reynolds very easily could have caught. Not maybe the perfectly placed ball. Nick Bosa came flying off of the left end to almost sack Jared Goff, but Goff escapes that, makes a good enough throw that, again, probably should have been caught, but that falls incomplete, and then it keeps it a 2-score game instead of a 3-score game, allows the 49ers to build up some semblance of momentum after really seeming dead for a lot of that game. And I think that sort of, if you go back and if you were just to listen to that game as a whole, from really that point on, and it was almost immediately after, the 49ers got a huge chunk play off of what should have maybe been an interception from Detroit, a misthrown Brock Purdy deep ball, hits their defensive back, Kindle Vildor, in the face mask, bounces up, and Ayuk is able to bring that pass down. From that sequence of events on, the San Francisco crowd just was juiced, and that really wasn't the case for a lot of the game. It was very quiet. The broadcast was showing the shot of a sad Brock Purdy. It's like, wow, this is actually how their season's going to end. And at that point, it was more about the Lions, but there was a little bit of Shanahan sort of takes, I think, that were brewing of their offense coming up short in a playoff game once again. But again, credit them for the comeback. But before we move on to the 49ers as a whole here, the second fourth down decision came later in the game, where at that point now in the fourth quarter, they are trailing by 3 points after things just totally unraveled for the Detroit Lions. They go for it again in field goal range. It would have been a 40-something yard field goal, and the 49ers bring pressure again, force Jared Goff out of the pocket, and that was sort of the conversation coming into this game. If you can move Jared Goff off of his spot, he's a very talented quarterback nonetheless, but you can force some inaccuracy issues, and that's pretty much what took place. He was looking downfield for St. Brown, and they just couldn't connect. So now, after the game, Campbell said, I understand the scrutiny I'll get. That's a part of the gig. He said that he did not regret his decisions, and you know what? You do have to, although you can disagree with his philosophy like I pretty much do, but there is something to sticking with your guns. I think that it's not a totally fair comparison, but Brandon Staley also had very interesting fourth down philosophies, and it sort of seemed like he was wishy-washy over the course of his career, and that uncertainty led to uncertainty within the locker room. And, you know, Dan Campbell said he was going to die with his players. He expects them to make those plays, and at least on that first one, they had a chance. Again, I probably would have kicked it on both occasions, but there is a little bit of something to this going for it all strategy had gotten them to the NFC Championship game. They came out in the opening game of the season and ran a fake punt against the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs for the first NFL game of the season. They let them know that that was what the expectation was going forward, is you're not going to be able to count them out really on any singular play, and ultimately it comes back to hurt them. But I think that it goes a lot further than just Dan Campbell. I thought that it was interesting after the game where in the press conference what he said to everybody was that he told his players right after the game, this may have been our only shot. And I think that they are positioned well going forward, but it is true just how tough the NFL can be to continuously get back to that point. You wouldn't necessarily know it from this Super Bowl matchup between the Chiefs on the other side and the 49ers in this one, as Niners gang is commenting, going back to Vegas. And I do think that, as he points out, saying, sorry, Patrick, no Jimmy G this time, I think that Brock Purdy is much more well-suited for this moment. You saw how he played down the stretch of the season, or the stretch of the comeback, I should say, and I thought that he was exceptional. The Niners looked bad. They looked very discombobulated to start that game. They miss a 48-yard field goal on their opening possession of the game. Purdy threw an interception where he was getting hit in the pocket. His arm was popped, so it wasn't a good pass, but at least it's better than some of the mental mistakes you could possibly worry about Purdy. And I think that he's very strong mentally. He doesn't often put it in harm's way, but I did not think he was at his sharpest against the Packers last week. And yes, this play comes up as an interception, but I don't think that it's necessarily something to worry about all that much. The Detroit Lions, they had the most pressures in the NFL this season. This was a blitz-heavy team. They were trying to get Purdy off of his spot. They get to him on this play, but you saw down the stretch of the game just how well he was able to not just make the throws, but I had never seen that level of mobility with Brock Purdy before, and this is just something that I feel like I watch a lot of football. I didn't know this is something that he necessarily had in his bag, the way that he was evading pressure, ducking out of sacks, and then getting up the field for scrambles. He had the scramble at the end of the Green Bay game last week, where on that final drive he had a scramble to put them closer to scoring distance, but I did not see this one coming. This game is a huge surprise to me. I thought that throughout the game too, Purdy did a pretty good job of throwing under pressure. I know that I referenced that one interception that he did have, but I thought as a whole, yes, he was being hit on that one individual play, but I thought that, the Lions were trying to throw a lot of stuff at him. He had an incredible throw, I thought, earlier in the game where he got lit up by Lions defensive tackle Aleem McNeil, and he was still able to deliver a great strike down the field to Deebo Samuel over the middle. And I do think that if your criticism is going to be that the biggest offensive play really for the 49ers in this game came off of a not great Purdy throw, I wouldn't disagree with you if that's how it played out. Like we were talking about that Brandon Ayuk 51-yard reception that came immediately after the Lions field goal, or the Lions' decision to actually not kick a field goal. I think that it was interesting because Purdy overthrew Ayuk, and he had the time. It just wasn't a great throw. Now, interesting, and I think it gets a little bit forgotten, but the refs did initially throw a flag on that play. I thought that as I was watching it, immediately I thought it was pass interference. They end up picking up the flag because Ayuk caught it anyways. I think that if he doesn't, and that's an interception, there's a good chance that they do actually call that penalty as it is. So I don't actually, fault Purdy as much as some other people. If you are a Purdy doubter, I think that you can try and use that to your argument, but I don't think that it really plays, because I think that one way or another that play likely does come out in a positive gain for the 49ers. So they get themselves together. This is, obviously going into these past 2 weeks, the mantra behind the 49ers is that they're a team that can't come back from down. They can't throw their way back into a game. They have to play their own game. Now, the Lions did give them the opportunity to sort of settle into their own. They scored the touchdown following that Brandon Ayuk reception. McCaffrey ends up punching it in. And then on the first play of the next Detroit drive, Jahmyr Gibbs runs the wrong way in terms of the handoff, never has control. He fumbles. The Niners tie the game right after that. So, you can definitely... Dan Campbell deserves a lot of blame, as the majority of head coaches do when you lose a big game like this and the lead falls apart the way that it does. But I think that it can't just be on him. It can't 100% come down to those two plays. Maybe don't fumble on your own 25-yard line. Josh Reynolds, 2 big drops, and I think that their receivers as a whole weren't really great down the stretch of that game. And then obviously the total blunder at the very end of the game when they are trying to score, the decision to then run the ball and burn a timeout after not getting in the end zone, getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage. That was pretty much a death sentence for them, because they were then going to need an onside kick, which in today's NFL is borderline impossible. So there's a lot of questionable coaching decisions. But, credit to the Niners. They are a very talented team on both sides. I know that the Lions sort of took it to them in the first half, but that's what the Lions do to people a lot of the times on offense. They have one of the best offensive lines. I love watching Penei Sewell play football. I used to be a lineman when I played football in high school, so maybe I'm a little too attached to it. But when that dude is moving in space, please keep your eyes on him, because he lays out some of the filthiest blocks in the NFL. I think it's a ton of fun to watch. So ultimately, it is the 49ers moving on to the Super Bowl to play the Kansas City Chiefs, the matchup from 2019. So before we sort of get into some of the bigger picture stuff with that, we're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we will be recapping the 49ers, or the Ravens and Chiefs game, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just finished up talking about the NFC Championship game between the 49ers and the Lions that saw the Niners coming back from a historic 17-point comeback from halftime on. Now we are going to be moving on to the other side of the bracket in the AFC, where the Chiefs hold on to upset the Baltimore Ravens 17-10. So this game was a stalemate in the second half. Neither offense could get very much done at all. And it was the Chiefs, after establishing the early offense and getting points on the board, they were able to outlast the Ravens in this one. I think that in order to just quickly to get into how the Chiefs had themselves up in this situation, Mahomes was incredible to start the game. He completed his first 10 passes. He was really firing on all cylinders and led a couple early touchdown drives for the Chiefs. Many of these big plays that he was converting with were to Travis Kelce, who there's been a lot of conversations about during the course of the season, but it has just come to the point where you're in the playoffs, you need a big play. For the Chiefs, it's going to Travis Kelce, who also passed Jerry Rice for the most receptions all time in NFL history. So incredibly impressive stuff from there. But the two of them, they completed a big time touchdown in the corner of the end zone where Kyle Hamilton was draped all over Kelce. Kyle Hamilton, I can't say enough good things about. I love watching that guy play football. He was a monster all game. He single-handedly made 3 plays in a row to shut down a Chiefs drive. He was great. But on this individual play, despite being in position, it was just a better throw and catch from one of the most dominant postseason duos in NFL history between Mahomes and Kelce. A low back shoulder throw to the corner where only Kelce could catch it. He comes down with it, and it was just a great play. The broadcast said that it was the first tight end touchdown that Kyle Hamilton had allowed. I think they said during the season, but if this was in his career, I would believe that too, because, again, I love watching this guy play football. Kelce ends up finishing with 11 catches on 11 targets, 116 yards, and a touchdown. So this is obviously the case, as it was last year when the Chiefs went on to win the Super Bowl, is they need production from Travis Kelce in order to succeed. And he's been giving them maybe not 100% of the production that he was last year. It seemed like he was just that much more dominant. I think that a big thing is a little bit with, I don't know if it's stamina or with the injuries he was dealing this year or what. I mean, he is getting up there in age, something like 33, 34 now for Kelce, but after he makes these individual plays, he has to come off the field almost every time afterwards. And again, that's not a knock at Kelce. He is a tight end that has taken a lot of big hits over his career. He's had a lot of mileage, a lot of usage from him. So it is a lot to ask this guy to be the total motor of your receiving core, but he's been able to do so for the past couple seasons, and he continued to do so in this game. But like I said, despite all this talk early about the offense, this was really more so about the defense and the lack of offense on the other end in Baltimore, because the Chiefs had 6 drives in the second half. They punted on the first 5 of which, and then on the last one picked up just enough yardage and first downs to ice that game and run the clock out. And it shouldn't come as a massive surprise, because this was, in fact, a matchup between the number 1 and the number 2 scoring defenses from the regular season. So, after 3 touchdowns were scored in the first 4 drives between the two teams, it got very murky. And again, this was the number 2 scoring defense in the Chiefs, so definitely no slouches whatsoever, but still a disheartening performance from the Ravens. I thought that coming into this game, there was a lot of talk about if there's one way that the Ravens can take advantage of this very good Chiefs defense, it is running the ball, because the Chiefs were not a good run defense this year. They were 27th, I believe, in rush yards this season, and the Baltimore Ravens were the number 1 rushing offense in the league. So I thought that there was very much room for them to take over the game in that sense, and they didn't even really try to, is the issue with this one. They handed the ball off just 8 times throughout the course of the game, 2 of which were to wide receiver Zay Flowers, who we will be touching on, and just 6 carries, 23 yards between Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. And with not even pretending like you're going to run, then maybe don't keep throwing out your small receivers to pick up blitzing linebackers and safeties in pass protection. I thought that was crazy. As on that note, Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, was incredible in this game. He drew up such a perfect scheme to get the Ravens off of their game, to keep Lamar Jackson guessing, and the Ravens maybe made it a little bit easier for them, but at the same time, with the amount of blitzes that Spagnuolo sent, I understand that crowded box, it is tougher to run the ball through that if you don't have the perfect runs drawn up, and on the other end, they just weren't able to really pick apart these blitzes in the passing game like other great passing offenses do. Some of that's on Lamar. Some of that is on the lack of true playmakers in the receiving game for the Ravens. So, again, it goes a couple ways with this, but I do think that Spagnuolo deserves a ton of credit for how this game played out. They sacked Lamar Jackson 4 times. Lamar was under pressure pretty much all game. And to my point about the running backs picking up linebackers, now Justice Hill did have a handful of good receptions, especially sort of on that big drive they had in the game from their water line. In instances where he's saying inside, you have to show defense to look up. You're on this 5'10" small running back. You pick up the likes of a Drew Tranquil, blitzing, a Stevenson, bigger guys, and we think around a bit. Pat Ricard is one of rifles left in the NFL. They all player, and I think they utilized more in the run game itself, and it was just a lack of believing what got you into this situation, and it was very much disappointing. We fight for these last few minutes here, but Zay got 84 yards between the touchdown play and the home play, and the time that took place at the end of the order, White Lamar Jackson could so deliver a pass inside 2, okay, for completion, and found the from there, and a receiving areas, and sort of play and the footage leads into the deeply emotional kind of there. It was the right before half play to run out and have things that face the penalty on the homeless, and just answer regards to also the video, just